Wyoming Territory, 1884. Silas Hargrove had been pushing Duke hard since the sky broke open just past 4, leaning into the wind with the specific determination of a man who had 3 miles left between himself and a dry barn, and intended to close that distance before dark finished falling. The road had turned to soup, sucking at the wagon wheels with every turn. The rain came slanted, then straight, then slanted again. That was when he saw her. A shape at the edge of the road that didn't belong to the landscape, too upright for a fence post, too small for the lone cottonwood a half-mile back. He pulled Duke to a stop and turned. A woman, standing with her back half-turned to the wind, shoulders curved forward in the posture of someone who had been walking against weather long enough to stop pretending it would let up. Her dress, once a pale yellow, was soaked through so completely it hung like a second skin. Her hair had come loose from its pins and was plastered flat against her cheek. She was holding something wrapped tight in a wool shawl, both arms curled around it the way a person makes their own body into a roof. He set the brake, leaned over the side of the wagon. "Ma'am." She looked up. Young face, tired eyes doing two things at once, sizing him up the careful way a woman alone on a road learns to, and failing to fully hide the exhaustion underneath it. "I'm fine," she said. It was not true in any way a person could observe. "You're soaked through, and it's near dark," he said. Temperatures dropping fast for October. She looked at the wagon. At him. At the road ahead, which disappeared into gray nothing, and offered no comfort in either direction. The shawl shifted. "Is that a child?" "My son," she said. "He's fine." Silas looked at this woman standing in the Wyoming rain holding an infant against her chest, like she was the last wall standing between the baby and the sky. He thought of his father, dead 9 years now, who used to say, "You stop for people on the road, Silas. You stop and you help, and you don't make them explain themselves first." He looked at the darkening sky, at the 4 miles of open range still ahead of her either direction, at the bundle that had just moved again. He moved over on the bench. "Get up." She studied him. "You don't know me." "No, I know it's getting dark and cold and you've got a baby." He held her eyes through the rain. "Name's Silas Hargrove. My place is 3 miles east. There's a barn, a house, and a fire going." She was deciding something. He could see the weight of it. Whatever she carried besides the child, making the arithmetic take longer than just weather and distance. "May we sleep in your barn?" she finally said. He held out his hand. "You can sleep in the house." She took it. The Hargrove Ranch house had been built for 2 people and lived in by 1 for 4 years. It showed the way empty places always show not falling apart, because Silas wasn't a man who let things go, but in a particular hollowness. 1 chair pulled from the table, a single coat on 2 hooks by the door, a cradle in the corner of the main room, dusted but clearly not forgotten, built small, for a newborn, never once used that anyone could see. Delia noticed all of it inside the first minute. She noticed most things that way, filing, building a picture without meaning to. The man who'd picked her up was a widower, not wealthy, but not struggling either. The house was kept the way a man keeps something he still respects, even if he's stopped loving it. She didn't ask about the cradle. But before the week was out, she'd understand why it had never held a child. Silas went straight to the kitchen, moving with the particular urgency of a man who needed the motion more than the task. Delia went to the spare room. He pointed her toward, clean, unused, but ready in the way of a man who prepares for things without expecting them. She laid the baby on the bed and unwrapped the wet shawl. Eli looked up at her with the wide, unbothered focus 5-month-olds give to everything, apparently unconcerned by the storm, the strange room, or the hour. "You," she said quietly, "are entirely too calm for the day we've had." She changed him into the one dry outfit she'd kept sealed in the inner pocket of her bag, the single thing she'd packed correctly and felt. For the first time in 5 days of stagecoaches and borrowed wagon beds, the specific relief of a body that has finally stopped moving. She let herself have 1 full minute of it. Then she heard Silas in the kitchen and thought of a man who hadn't asked her a single question, and got up to help, because that was the only honest currency she had left. Silas made stew, not hospitality performed, just the most practical thing on hand. Beef from Sunday, root vegetables from the cellar. Delia appeared in the kitchen doorway with Eli on her hip, hair combed back, wearing a borrowed dry dress. "Can I help?" "It's stew," he said. "Doesn't need 2 people. Everything needs 2 people," she said. "One to stir, one to watch the bread doesn't burn." He handed her the bread without argument. They ate at the table, 1 chair pulled out and a second dragged from the corner, rain loud against the glass, fire warm, Eli propped in Delia's lap studying Silas with the full, unembarrassed attention of a baby cataloging a new face. "He's looking at you," Delia said. "I see that. Means he's decided you're interesting. He doesn't look at walls that long." Silas received this the way he received most things, without performing a reaction. "What's his name?" "Eli. How old?" 5 months, 3 weeks. He nodded, went back to his stew. Eli, satisfied with his assessment, dropped his head against his mother's shoulder and closed his eyes. Outside, the rain went on. Inside, the fire went on. Silas Hargrove ate supper across from a woman he didn't know, and her son, and never once asked why they'd been walking alone on a Territory road in a storm. He'd told her she didn't need to explain herself. He meant it. The fever came at 2 in the morning. Delia woke to Eli hot against her side, that dry, papery heat that meant something was wrong. She sat up, checked what the midwife back home had taught her to check. Breathing fast but not labored, color high but not blue. Sick, not in danger, not yet. She needed cool cloths and hot water, and she was in a stranger's house at 2 in the morning. She found Silas already up when she reached the kitchen, lamp lit, still in his work clothes. He'd been sleeping in the chair. "Fever," she said, keeping her voice low. "I need hot water." He took the pot from her hands without a word, stirred the coals awake. He moved like a man who'd been up at hard hours before and wasn't slowed by them. How bad? Bad enough to worry. Not bad enough for the worst of it. Go back to him. I'll bring the water. She sat with Eli through the night, damp cloth on his forehead, talking to him low. Not words exactly, just the sound that means safe. Silas appeared in the doorway with the pot, looked at the baby, and something crossed his face in the lamplight, something that arrived and was managed before it could fully land. He sat in the corner chair without being asked. She didn't tell him to leave. At 3, the fever broke. Eli went into the deep, finished sleep of a body that had won something. "You should sleep," she told Silas. "I'm fine in the chair." She looked at this man, sitting up in the dark in his own house with a stranger's sick child, and thought of a cradle in the next room that had never been used, and understood, the way one grief sometimes recognizes another, exactly what it cost him to stay in that chair. "Thank you," she said instead, "for stopping on the road." He looked toward the window where the rain had thinned to dripping gutters. "My father told me to stop for people. It's not a virtue, it's a habit. Some habits are virtues," she said. "Before we keep going, if this story's keeping you company tonight, wherever you are, on a drive or folding laundry, or just sitting somewhere quiet, that's exactly what this channel is for. Drop a like if Silas and Delia and Eli have earned it so far, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now, back to the ranch, because Delia has something she still needs to tell him. She told him on the 8th evening, after Eli was asleep and the fire had gone low. She told him about Thomas No. She caught herself and started again. Told him about her late husband Caleb, 3 years on a small Missouri farmstead, a marriage built on the same wants and the same land. Caleb had gone quick with a fever that spring, barely a month after Eli was born, and left her a homestead deed and a brother-in-law who'd arrived at the burial with his hands already counting what it was worth. Wyatt Marsh wanted the land 40 acres with the only reliable well for 2 miles, the same acreage he'd tried to buy off Caleb for 6 years before Caleb ever got to it first. Wyatt had covered the burial costs when Delia didn't have the money ready, and had used that debt as the opening argument in a petition filed with the county court, that Delia Marsh was a recently widowed woman, alone, unsuited to raise a child, unfit to hold property. The petition hadn't been heard yet. It wasn't an order. But the county judge back home had known Wyatt for 20 years and owed him more than one favor, and Delia hadn't waited around to find out how a hearing like that would go. She'd sold what she could carry no further, taken what money it bought her as far west as it stretched, and walked the last stretch toward nowhere specific except away. Silas was quiet the way he was quiet when he was taking something seriously. "Caleb left that land to me and Eli," she said finally. "Wyatt paid for a coffin. He didn't buy my son with it. Does he know which way you went? Not exactly. He'll start close and work outward. How far behind?" She thought about the days. 4. Maybe 5. Silas nodded slowly, doing arithmetic with more variables than he'd started with. "A petition that hasn't been heard is not an order," he said, "and a petition filed in one county has no force in another. This is Larimer County. Different court, different judge." He held her eyes. "Wyatt Marsh can ride in here with a paper, and that paper means nothing unless our local judge decides to honor it. Judge Holt's known me 15 years. Silas, you don't have to, I know that," he said. "Let me talk to him tomorrow, before Wyatt does." She looked down at her hands, thought of 5 days of moving alone, because needing people had always felt like a trade with unpredictable terms. Thought of a man who hadn't asked her to explain herself, who'd sat in a corner chair until 3 in the morning, who'd said, "I'll bring the water," and meant it. "Go," she said. Wyatt arrived on a Friday, 2 men riding with him for the look of authority. Silas was in the yard when the wagon came up the track. Delia was on the porch. She hadn't hidden. He hadn't asked her to. Wyatt got down and looked at Silas, then Delia, then back. "That's my brother's widow. And his boy." "I know about the paper," Silas said. "Judge Holt knows about it too." Wyatt looked at Delia. "Delia, you paid for Caleb's coffin," she said, coming down the steps, Eli on her hip. "I'm grateful for that. You didn't buy my son with it." Her voice stayed level. "That land was left to me and Eli. If you've got a claim, take it to Judge Holt at a proper hearing. That's the only process I'll take part in." The 2 men with Wyatt shifted in their saddles, men who'd agreed to escort a piece of paper, and found the paper meeting a woman who knew exactly what it was and wasn't. Silas stepped up beside her, not in front of her. Beside her. "Mrs. Marsh has made herself clear. Judge Holt's office is open Monday, if you want to file it right." Wyatt looked at what he'd come for, and the plain impossibility of taking it from a woman standing her own ground in her own yard. He got back in the wagon. He didn't come back. "You didn't need me," Silas said, once the road was empty again. "No," Delia said, "but I was glad you were there." She looked at him. "Ask me something." He turned to face her fully. "Would you still ask me to stay? If nobody were chasing you at all?" He held her gaze a long moment. "Yes," he said. "The trouble only made me say it sooner." That evening, after supper, with Eli asleep in the next room, Silas told her about Ruth No. He told her about Margaret, his wife, gone 4 years now. About the son they'd lost the same night she died, too early, No name ever spoken aloud in this house since. About the cradle his own father had built, and why putting it away had always felt like giving up on something he hadn't decided to give up on yet. Delia listened without performing anything, the way she listened to most things. "The cradle," she said quietly. "Afterward, Eli's outgrown the basket. He rolls now." She looked at Silas. "He could sleep in it. If you want that." Silas didn't answer right away. Then he stood, crossed the room, and set his hand on the edge of the cradle for the first time in 4 years. "Yes," he said. "I want that." They married that spring, in the small Larimer County church, with the last snow gone from the valley floor, and the first green climbing the foothills. Judge Holt sat in the second row, considering himself partly responsible for the outcome and intending to witness it properly. Silas wore his good coat, the one Margaret had liked, because starting something new, he'd come to understand, didn't require leaving behind what came before. It meant carrying it forward honestly. Delia wore the pale yellow dress, mended and dried, because it seemed right to begin in the same color she'd arrived in. Eli, 10 months old by then, took 2 unsteady steps down the church aisle, before sitting down decisively to confirm the room had witnessed it. The room had witnessed it. By the following winter, the cradle held a second child, and Delia sat some evenings with the account books while Silas read by the fire, not turning a page for 10 minutes at a stretch, watching the two of them the way a man watches something he'd once believed was only ever going to be a memory of what the house used to hold. He'd once thought the cradle was proof of everything the house had lost. That winter, he understood it had also been waiting.